Hi, my name is Matt Danigan. In this video, I would like to discuss with you the myth of Molly Pitcher. Many stories about Molly Pitcher have been told, and they have been reinforced since many of our childhoods. I remember growing up and hearing about Molly Pitcher in social studies class and her exploits on the battlefield. At first glance, the story of Molly Pitcher seems to be of one that's similar to George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. It's a great story, especially tell kids about being honest, and this is a great story about women's accomplishments on the battlefield to pay homage to that. But when we dig in, we find out that there are actually a few women that could possibly fit the bill of being the real Molly Pitcher. So let's just have a refresher on who Molly Pitcher actually was. According to legend, Molly Pitcher was a woman who was present on the battlefield at either the Battle of Fort Washington or the Battle of Monmouth. During the battle, she was seen running back and forth carrying a silver pitcher of water, giving water to those who were tired and those who were wounded. To get her attention, the men would yell, "Molly, Pitcher!" And so the name Molly Pitcher was born. At some point during this battle, her husband, who was an artilleryman, actually either went down with a wound or he suffered from heat exhaustion. It was reportedly very hot that day, or he was actually mortally wounded. So seeing this, she jumped into action. She took his swab and began helping to clean and load the cannon. Men were very, you know, very impressed with the fact that a woman was doing this, and the guy actually who wrote one of the accounts of this actually didn't seem like it was that big a deal that a woman was on the battlefield. So it makes us believe that this is actually commonplace. But this incredible story for many is just a tall tale of heroism. So when you look at that, many people just brush this account off. However, there are multiple sources backing the fact that Molly Pitcher was at the very least a real woman. And she might even be a real woman, a woman who is made up of multiple stories, but all these stories happen. Uh, One of these sources in a journal by Private Joseph Plum Martin. He was his personal war journal, and it describes Molly's heroic act. This is the most famous account of Molly Pitcher and describes a lady by the name of Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay. And says, this is what he writes. He says, a woman whose husband belonged to the artillery and who was then attached to a piece in the engagement attended with her husband at the piece for the whole time. While in the act of reaching for a cartridge and having one of her feet as far before the other as she could step, a cannon shot from the enemy passed directly between her legs, without doing any other damage than carrying away all the lower part of her petticoat. Looking at it with apparent unconcern, she observed that it was lucky it did not pass a little higher. I've actually read a couple of articles that says she said, wow, that could have been worse. For in the case that it might, this is going back to Plum, have carried away something else, and she continued her occupation. Well, that seems pretty cut and dry that fits the second half of the Molly Pitcher story. One problem arises. Congress actually recognizes a few other soldiers. One of these soldiers, her name is Mary Corbin, actually was on one of the same battlefields that Mary Macaulay was. But Corbin, in a lot of patriotic literature, was known as Molly Pitcher. This is from Congress. It says, resolved that Margaret Corbin, who was wounded and disabled in the attack on Fort Washington, whilst she heroically filled the post of her husband, who was killed by her side serving a piece of artillery, do receive during her natural life or the continuance of the said disability the one half of the monthly pay drawn by a soldier in the service of these states, and that she now receive out of the public stores one complete suit of clothes and the value thereof in money. So it's apparent that there might be multiple women who fit this Molly Pitcher. These are two women who have and live similar lives and had similar accounts of things happening. They both took over for their husbands in artillery. One fits it a little better than the other, and there's even more accounts. So in this short amount of time, there's not really to get into it. But the fact that the Molly Pitcher story serves to remind us that women helped on the battlefield, and they might not get the credit and the honor that they deserve in the heroism as they went out throughout the Revolutionary War. More than likely, we'll never know who exactly was the real Molly Pitcher, but these two individuals and others fit the bill more than likely candidates. Thank you. Other likely candidates.